today I'm going to play the Handel Suite in E major. I happen to think Handel's a fabulous composer. I had a friend who was quite opposed to that opinion. He thought that he thinks Handel is a big bore. But to each his
Why
own.
would he think that, Raymond? Is there a good reason?
Why do I think Handel's a good composer?
No. Well, why would you think that? Does he have a good reason?
No, he's just a Bach snob.
Oh.
That's my interpretation. If it's not Bach, it's third rate, and he's one of these Bach worshipers. And I am going to play a Bach suite too, equal time, maybe next week. But anyway, I'm playing the Handel Suite in E major. Handel, his most famous piece, of course, is Messiah. But he wrote a whole bunch of other stuff, about 20 keyboard suites, a whole bunch of operas. In fact, he moved from Germany to London to start an opera company, which was very successful for about 3 or 4 years until an Italian composer that no one has ever heard of these days, named Giovanni Bononcini, moved to London and put Handel out of business. Because everybody, the fashion turned from Handel to Bononcini, and Bononcini was all the rage, and poor Handel went bankrupt. So he did recoup. That's what started him writing oratorios. And very interestingly, except for Messiah, all of Handel's oratorios are Old Testament subjects. And the speculation is that he did this because by the middle of the 18th century, there was a relatively, it wasn't large by any standard, but there was a relatively large and prosperous middle-class Jewish community in London. And they ate up these heroic Old Testament operas and, packed a house, and Handel made a bucket load off writing these operas. In fact, the audiences were so crowded that gentlemen were requested to leave their swords at home so that there would be more room in the audience, because no well-heeled, decent gentleman in 18th century London would be seen without his sword at his side. So there was a request for the gentlemen to leave their swords at home so that there could be more room in the audience. And oratorio is frankly the way Handel climbed out of bankruptcy. Anyway, the other interesting thing about Handel has nothing to do with music. Two things is, number one, he apparently had a very, very hair-triggered temper. And at one point, a soprano was singing for him, and he became so exasperated with her that he grabbed her and dangled her out the window until she agreed not to put so many ornaments in his music that it was unrecognizable. He also could do this because he was apparently 6'2", which in the middle of the 18th century was essentially a giant. What was the average height in the 18th century? 4'11", maybe 5 feet. So he was a giant. He was also very hardworking. There's this attitude about, these super geniuses that, they don't have to practice and they don't have to work at it, and it just all comes naturally to them. And this is, nobody was there, but this is apparently not true, because when Handel died and they removed his harpsichord from his house, he had practiced so much that the keys, which were made out of wood, had depressions worn from his fingers. There were little dips in the keys from his playing it so many hours a day. So that's how hard he worked at this. Also, in a related story, young Mozart wrote a piano concerto, and his father said to him that it was not playable. And apparently, the young Mozart's response was, "Well, Papa, you have to practice it. That's why it's called a concerto." Which, shows how hard these guys worked at this. Okay, so this Handel suite is in E major. And I've talked about suites before. There are a series of dance movements, supposedly. That's what a suite is. It starts with an Allemande, which is a slow dance in 4. Then it has a Courante, which is a fast dance in 3. Then it has a sarabande, which is a slow dance in 3. And then after that, you alternate whatever you figure, and you end with a jig. That's the way it's supposed to work. You can maybe put in a prelude. Well, that's not what Handel does. He does start with a prelude. He does have an Allemande and a Courante. But where he's supposed to have the sarabande and the rest of the dances, he puts in a theme and variations. This is not supposed to be in a suite, but Handel was a little bit like Haydn. He's a very quirky composer. He does odd modulations. He has odd, phrases. You're supposed to have 4 or 8 major phrases, and they're supposed to go from up and down. Well, Handel, you have 5 measure phrases. You have weirdo modulations. If he writes a fugue, the fugue voices don't come in the right order. Blah 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 blah. And the tune that he ends the suite with was a very famous tune in 18th century London called the Harmonious Blacksmith. It was like writing a tune on, some popular song today, some tune that everybody knows, Happy Birthday or something. But it's a very interesting tune. And it starts out with this big kind of just slam on the piano, on the keyboard. Just an octave E. And then the tune starts. And in my opinion, that octave E is the blacksmith, the harmonious blacksmith, hitting his anvil with his hammer.
Raymond, could we ask everyone to mute themselves?
I'm going to do that in a minute.
Oh, good.
Oh, should I do it now?
It's a little distracting.
Okay, I'll do it now.
Thank you.
Raymond, don't forget to record.
I won't. I already gave Ellen permission to record, and I will plug the mic in. So the suite is a prelude, an Allemande, a Courante, and then this theme, and see if you can figure out how many variations. The variations get more and more complicated, and then it ends with this kind of, blaze of fireworks final variation that shows off what you can do. So I'm now going to play that. And now for something completely different. As I said, the second piece from Zez Confrey's Three Little Oddities. Zez Confrey is an American, he's dead now, was an American composer. He was born in Peru, Illinois. And he had ambitions to be a concert pianist, and he actually could have been. There are some, you can hear him playing on YouTube, and he was a good piano player. So he could have had a career as a pianist, but he found that he really liked doing these little novelty pieces, I guess you would call them. Stanley let the cat out of the bag, no pun intended. His most famous piece, which I'm sure all of you have heard of, is called Kitten on the Keys, which supposedly was inspired when he visited his grandmother in Chicago, and her kitten was walking up and down the piano keys, and it inspired him to write this piece, which I'm going to play in a couple of weeks when I know it. But today he wrote a piece in 1922, called Three Little Oddities, a Suite for Pianoforte. And interestingly enough, in 1922, his piece cost 75 cents, which in 1922 was a lot of money. So I don't know how much of that went to the composer, but this was published, yay, local team, by the Boston Music Company, which was for many years a publishing company located on State Street in Boston, now gone. They licensed this to Schirmer in New York and Allen and Company Limited in Melbourne, Australia, which I find utterly fascinating. Why Australia, I don't know. Anyway, this is the second in the group, and it's called Novelette. It's a combination of all sorts of things, you know. It's a combination of short piano pieces by somebody like Brahms or Schumann. It's got a lot of Debussy in it. It's got a lot of jazz, blues chords and blues notes. Some Gershwin, some Joplin, good composer. So this is Novelette.